Hi there, welcome back to my channel. My name is Markus Jooste. As you can tell from the title of this channel, I am tackling a very complicated topic today, but I'm also hoping that the way I approach this topic, this video, will also be useful to anyone who is not from an accounting background. And also I also have to be honest and say that my opinion comes from an accounting background because I did study, I did my first degree, Bachelor of Accounting from Stellenbosch University. So my understanding of this big fraud scandal is definitely more from an accounting point of view. And I think that I need to be honest and transparent. I watched Steinheist and they definitely described what happened very simply. But I guess this is me just wanting to understand the technicalities a bit more, what went down, why exactly was it fraud? Because I think if you are not from an accounting background, you might not understand what Markus Jooste did. A lot of people do not understand what he did. We all understand that he basically committed fraud, he basically committed theft, and it was a smart case of theft by conversion. Anyway, disclaimers are all done. Let's get into this video. Now, a bit of background as to who Markus Jooste is. I think this is also very important when it comes to understanding the story. I think I'll probably make this story two parts because it is so complex. A lot of things happened, right? So Markus Jooste, a student at Stellenbosch University, I think he was a first year in 1979, and he was also in the men's residence Wilgenhof, the popular Wilgenhof. Now, why do I mention this as being relevant? In recent reports, I think last year, early this year, there was a huge scandal, some very disturbing items, figures, pictures, and things were found in two of the rooms at the Wilgenhof men's residence, and that is where Markus Jooste resided when he was in university, including Christoph Visser and a lot of popular people known today. And as someone who also studied at Stellenbosch University, I know about that race very well. And my comment with regards to this and why it is relevant, like I said, I was also at a race, at a Stellenbosch University race. I was in Minerva, and initiation is a huge part. I don't know now, because obviously with times things change, and it's no secret that some of the initiation practices that used to happen back in the days are not acceptable today. They even like to use the word punishment. I don't know why you would punish someone for just simply being a first year at university. But I can say for myself that there is this culture. Stellenbosch is a place I would say that is rich in culture, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. But when that culture starts to find itself in boardrooms, that's a problem. When that culture starts to find itself at the within the members of the board, that's a problem. And I think I'll talk more about this in part 2, because for this video I just want to focus on actually answering the question of what did Markus Jooste do, how exactly did he actually commit these fraudulent acts from an accounting point of view, and I'm gonna try and make it simple so that anyone can understand. And also, I don't know what else to say about him being in Wilgenhof. Hey, I think I wanted to mention about the culture is that I also did initiation. I did it in 2014. In 2015, it was already different to how it was done in 2014. I think you had the option to opt out of some of the things you might have had to do. I don't remember it being anything intense. I actually remember it being a lot of fun. I was never hurt in any way, but I think it's different between, you know, women's residence and a men's residence. The only thing I did, which I felt a bit uncomfortable with, was having to write my name in this really old book. It looked like a like a ritual, and I was like, I'm Christian, I don't know if this is right, but I unfortunately wrote my name in that book. So that's why I say that I can only imagine, knowing what we know now about what was found in the Wilgenhof men's residence. Yeah, and also there are cases of societies within men's residence whereby whatever happens there is not spoken of. Now here comes the issues, too many secrets. They are not allowed to talk about what happens at initiation. And a lot of the practices were still happening. I went to Stellenbosch with the intention of, I just want to get my degree, I'm not here to play. But then all of these opportunities to play, have fun, connect with people, that's why I say I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with the culture. It's just that the culture spreads into spaces it should not spread. And anyone that you are in res with, like some of the people I made friends with, I even regard them as my sisters. They're not just friends, right? Back to the financial crime. The Steinhoff Saga has been compared to Enron. Now, if you ever did ethics in uni, I think most people are required to study ethics. If you're an accounting student, you would definitely be required to take ethics. You would know the Enron case. If you're interested in financial crimes, you know about the Enron case. So this case is very, very, very big. And the way I want to describe it, I want to start from the accounting equation. But before I get to the accounting equation, I want to just talk about what it means to be listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. So, I think it's quite interesting that, this story dropped December 2017, a day before my graduation. 6th December 2017, I graduated. And only in 2022, Steinheist came out with their documentary. It was a 3-part series, and I watched it. I was astonished, and it was quite interesting that this is the first time we're actually being told about what happened at Steinhoff. Very interesting, the time frames. I think also, like, just to understand what happened there is not going to be easy. It's extremely complicated, and I think it's complicated because Steinhoff, I think I would just talk about in the South African context. If I start talking about their subsidiaries and some of their if I start talking about their partnerships overseas, this video will become way too complex for me to explain, and I think for the average person to understand, because I really want to explain the story from a layman's terms, from a layman's point of view, so that anybody could understand what happened, right? So I think let me just get straight into it, right? I'm blabbing. Steinhoff was listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. It doesn't really matter the year, but I believe it was around the 90s. I think I will just put the right year down there. But it was listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, and it's important that when a company is listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, it means that anyone can buy shares in that company. It means that I can go and buy shares. It means that Thabo can go and buy shares. So it also means that it's a public company. The minute you're listed, you can't be a PTY limited, you are just a limited. That's for the South African context, and that law generally should apply no matter where you are in the world. And the minute you're a publicly listed entity, you are required to be audited, because what you are saying is that you are inviting the public to buy shares in your company, right? And when the public buys shares in your company, the public has an interest. So if I buy, let's say, 100 out of 1,000 shares of a publicly listed company, I become an owner of 10% of that company. And so Markus Jooste's crimes were really not just against the people he did business with, but they were really against people that he did business with. They were really against the ordinary person who would have just said, you know what, I have a lump sum of money, I want to do the right thing, and I want to invest in some shares, And if somebody took their pension and say, I'm gonna buy shares, or they took their whatever, their life savings, and say, I'm gonna invest in shares at Steinhoff, they would have been, you know, severely impacted. So it's a really sad story. It's a serious crime. And yeah, so because I want to take on an accounting point of view to explain exactly how he committed the crime, I think it's good for my professional development, and also just to be aware. Markus Jooste, he was a CASA, and upon the scandal breaking down, his designation was taken away from him. And yeah, so how his crimes affected people, you know, the very basis of it is that he inflated profits, he inflated assets. And when you inflate your assets, remember the book value of a company. If we look at the accounting equation, so I'm going to put the accounting equation here. The accounting equation is assets equals owner's equity plus liability. So owner's equity, the equity is in a way the book value of an entity, and what goes into equity is a company's profits. It's also very important to stress that Steinhoff was a holding company of several companies. So that is actually how he managed to execute these crimes, execute these dubious financial transactions, which enabled him to inflate the profits and the assets. And when you inflate profits and assets, you essentially inflate your equity, which then inflates the value of the company, which then inflates the share price of one of your shares. So the biggest issue was that the shares were trading at a much higher value than what they were actually worth. So if you were saying, oh, if you took your money, let's say, apparently when the scandal occurred, 2017, December 2017, just before, I think they were trading around 96 Rand. I think they even, at their highest point, they were at 104 Rand, I believe. I stand to be corrected. I might be forgetting the exact figures, but the just before, I think they were trading at 96 Rand for one share. So imagine you take your money and thinking you're buying something worth 96 Rand, and you could buy 5 of those, 100 of those, 200 of those, I don't know, but you are actually holding on to nothing, right? You're holding onto a loss. Let's say they're worth 50 Rand and you bought for 90 Rand, you have cut yourself short and you have shot yourself in the foot. So what determines the share price of a share is the profit, how the company performs, you know, your equity. It's the profit, and it's also demand and supply on the JSE. That's like with anything really, right? The higher the demand of anything increases, the more people want to buy, and if you increase that price, people will still want to buy. But if the price starts going down, it would be because people are selling that share more than buying that share. But that is something else your forex traders would understand better. That is something we're not interested in today's video. But to cut the story short, that is what happened. Now I am interested in the intricacies of how he executed this. So that would mean that we have to zoom into some of the transactions that occurred. Number one being the famous Knysna Forests. I think the story, fun enough, is so close to me because I grew up in Knysna. So the Knysna Forest thing is, it has to do with the fact that when Markus Jooste started his company, it used to be called Goma Goma. So Steinhoff is actually a company that comes from it's the Netherlands. It's Germany. There we go. It's Germany. So Steinhoff was actually that company was a German guy's company. I would put his name down below, a picture of him. If you watch Steinheist, you will know what I'm talking about. And Markus Jooste's company was Goma Goma, and it produced furniture. Very interesting, random, it was a furniture business, and then it merged with Steinhoff and then operated as Steinhoff in South Africa. So what essentially allowed him to commit these crimes is the fact that Steinhoff was a holding company of many companies. It purchased famous South African companies such as Pepco. I think Pepco, I will have to fact check, but obviously they own Pep, I think Ackermans, a lot of other entities we know. I will list them below. And essentially, yes, Steinhoff is the parent company, but it's very important to stress that the share price that was on the JSE was determined according to the performance of the entire group. So if a parent company acquires smaller companies, or if you have a situation where you have a parent company and subsidiaries, they are required to present their financial statements as a group, and those are called consolidated statements. Yes, consolidated financial statements. And that is something we study quite in detail as accountants, and it's actually a section of work that I enjoy, if I can say. I find them complicated but also straightforward. You are just combining, right? There's some rules as to how you do the combining of the group structures and everything. You get vertical groups, you get horizontal groups. Very interesting stuff, but if you love your accounting, it's fairly straightforward stuff. And it can also get complicated. I can only imagine how complex it is, because Steinhoff had so many subsidiary companies, so many. And I think that also assisted him to get away with the theft, because a lot of the theft and the funny transactions were occurring through these companies. And it's also quite interesting that the auditors missed this for so long, because one of the sections, I come from an audit background. I have a few years as an audit trainee, and even me, I know that transactions, related parties, connected persons, those are very important things to look out for in an audit. You have to really test those transactions, if not at 100%. But I can imagine with a company as big as Steinhoff, it's not going to be possible. You will not have the time, the resources to test everything, right? But at some point, I feel like something must have been off. But anyways, back to the Knysna Forests. So what happened with the Knysna Forests is that it's one of those related party transactions. There's a company called Fihag Finance. I suspect they were actually a subsidiary. So they were a subsidiary of Steinhoff. They were one of the subsidiaries, and they purchased the Knysna Forest for 11 million. So I was explaining that it's furniture forest. It makes sense, right? He wants to own the entire value chain, right? He wants to own the wood, so he can manufacture the furniture and then sell it, right? It's cheaper for you to manufacture if you own the entire value chain. So there was nothing wrong there. Seems like a smart business move, but here's where the fraud comes in. The forests were purchased by Fihag Finance for 11 million rand. Then after the forests are purchased for 11 million rand, Markus Jooste then sets up a shell company, like sort of like someone who hide and perform these transactions for them, because I think it would have been very easy for them to realize that Fihag Finance is selling to the parent. But there was a shell company, an intermediary company that was used to do this transaction, and then Steinhoff ended up purchasing these forests for 149 million. Now already that should scream, what the hell. If you're a good businessman, right, you want to get the best deals. You're not going to buy something that is worth 5 rand for 10 rand. You want to buy it for 5 rand or at least 6 rand, because remember, everyone wants to make a profit. So it wouldn't have been suspicious had the forest been maybe purchased for 12 million rand or 13 million rand. But the fact that these forests were then purchased for 149 million rand, what the heck. But what that essentially did for him is that when you acquire an asset, remember I said assets equals owner's equity plus liabilities. So if you have high assets, the minute you increase your assets, you increase your equity. You can also just rewrite the assets equals owner's equity plus liability. It basically means equity equals assets minus liabilities. So the minute the assets go up, the equity also goes up. I hope that makes sense. I'll try to draw it here next to me or below. But the minute you do that, your equity also increases, right? And it increases because he purchased these forests for 149 million rand. And though he is the one, though Steinhoff is the one purchasing, remember there's subsidiaries. The fact that the child company has made this profit of 149 minus 11 means that when the group statements are drafted, there's still going to be that 138 million profit just sitting in the group itself. So the loss of them purchasing something worth little is now magically fixed by the profit that the subsidiary has made. So this crime was so smart. The crime does not stop there. The crime affects SARS. That's why if you watch Steinheist, they'll keep on saying the tax rates were really low. That was a red flag. But this is one of the reasons why the tax rates were really low, is that, so if you're an accounting student, you'll know that there is assets get depreciated, right? So these forests would have been depreciated, though I don't know why forests get depreciated, but it's quite interesting because they shouldn't, because I would classify them as land. But this is a section of the income tax I don't know. So this guy was so smart. I would have to fact check this, because in my mind, why would you depreciate forests unless you can prove you're using them? Yeah, since he was doing the furniture, yeah, I suppose that's why they would be depreciated. Yo, this thing is crazy. This thing is so crazy. So because they get depreciated, and in tax they would be depreciated using the wear and tear. Instead of depreciating at 11 million, they were getting depreciated at 149 million, meaning that Steinhoff was able to deduct quite a lot from their profits. And if you're able to deduct a lot from your profits, you essentially pay less tax. So this crime was, I don't know, amazing. You can almost look at him and be like, wow, your mind, sir, how? But really, really sad that, you know, someone would use their intelligent mind to just commit fraud. So that is a more detailed description of what happened with the Knysna Forests, because of the group statements. Essentially what happens, I hope I did explain this part correctly, is that the profits, let's say for example, let's use a simple analogy. We have entity A that owns entity B and C. When entity A's group statements are drafted, they will include the profits of B and C. So that's how the group itself, and it was essentially the group that was listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. Well, I did research. I think it was the holding company that was listed, but the share price was actually based off of the group's performance. And that's why it had such a high share price. And then the second part of most of his scams is quite similar to the Knysna Forest, except that in this case he is targeting people like Christopher, whom he was in the same race with. I find that so strange. That, you know, we just spoke about how, you know, if we are in the same race, we are often brothers, we're often sisters. How did he do this to his fellow Velchanofa? I don't know what they call themselves, but yeah, how do you do that to somebody you're supposed to look up to somebody who you're supposed to see as a brother, which is also quite, it raises a little bit of a red flag. But I don't know, I don't want to speculate. I think for me the red flag is whereby, similar to the Knysna Forest situation I just explained, Markus Jooste was purchasing entities. He did the same with the Techie Town and the Pepco, those are the most popular ones, but it did it across all the entities. I don't know, I'll look for how many subsidiaries Steinhoff had, but it must have been quite a few. So what he would do is that, so before, let's say I own a company and I want to grow by buying other companies, before you purchase any company, you perform a valuation, right? We just talked about the valuation. The book value of a company is essentially assets equals owner's equity minus liability. The equity is essentially the book value of that company, but there are more complex valuation methods, but you perform a valuation, right? And if Techie Town, for example, I don't know about the exact figures, was worth 2 million rand, why would you purchase it for 10 million rand? Makes no sense. At the very least, you're going to purchase it for like maybe 2.5 million rand, 2.3 million rand. And where I say these transactions are suspicious is that, you know, Techie Town must have known the value of their entity. So why were they also willing participants in receiving so much more than what their companies are worth? Unless, like, it just does not make any sense, right? To me anyways. I would love to know what people think in the comment section. And I will talk about the Techie Town people, I think, in part 2 of this video. So what he did, so when company A acquires company B, it's called an acquisition. And when an acquisition occurs, there's certain consolidation journals that will be written down, right? That will be processed, and that goes down to the goodwill topic that the Steinheist documentary tried. Well, they did touch on it, but I feel like not in so much detail. They did not really explain how goodwill arises. So now goodwill is an intangible asset, and that essentially means that you can't touch goodwill. We can't see, we don't know what goodwill looks like, but we know about goodwill, right? It's more about, it's an intrinsic value, right? It's that thing, it occurs because, let's say for example, I buy, that's the simplest way to describe goodwill. If company A purchases company B, and company B is worth, let's say, 100 rand, and then company A purchases company B for 120 rand, there needs to be a journal process for that extra 20 rand that company A has paid for company B. And that is usually called goodwill. Now and goodwill is an asset. It's a non-current asset. It will sit on the balance sheet. It will sit in assets. So the fact that he was purchasing these companies, company A, for 1,000 rand even, you know, it was ridiculous overpricing. It's worth 100 rand, you're gonna buy it for 1,000 rand. Now you have a 900 rand you're gonna put in your assets, in your balance sheet. It's of which that is something that is not real. It doesn't exist. It doesn't happen like that. Why is the company being purchased at a much higher value than what it is? And he didn't lose any cash, because he then said, hey, instead of paying you, so he then said, company A then said company B, instead of me paying you 1,000 rand for the value of your company, let me offer you the number of Steinhoff shares. So this is, it happens a lot in business. It's not a crime. They're called share swaps. So company A basically swaps their shares for some Steinhoff shares because the Steinhoff shares are worth more. So he will then say, for me to control 100% of company B, I'll give you 100 shares of Steinhoff. So there is no like money transfer. So again, this man is just having a field day playing with numbers, crunching accounting numbers. Like, it's fascinating. So I think why I raise a red flag is that if I'm gonna sell my company, let's think about this. And I know, because some companies can take advantage, right? The person who performs a valuation needs to be independent, because you want your company to be valued at the right price before you sell it. But if there are mistakes, it's gonna be minor mistakes. A company that is truly worth 3 million will never be valued at 5 million. Maybe at most it will be valued at 3.1, 3.2, but why would it be valued at 10 million? Like, it just makes no sense. And then he bought those companies at the alleged higher value, again inflating those assets, inflates the profits, then inflates the share price. So I just felt like that was not specified enough in the documentary. I hope I made sense, because honestly the crimes he committed are so vast, and he did this across multiple deals, across multiple companies, and including creating things that didn't even happen. So one of the fundamental principles of accounting is that it truly starts from the source documents, right? If you're a bookkeeper and accountant, you know that you don't process a journal which doesn't have supporting evidence, doesn't have supporting documents. And apparently a lot of these deals happened as what is the word? There's a fancy word we use. It happened as words. It didn't happen on paper. It happened verbally. Yes, there were verbal agreements. So a lot of these deals happened as verbal agreements and not even on paper, which is crazy. It's not allowed. It's just not allowed. We are supposed to know. There's supposed to be a valuation, right? If you're gonna acquire a company, there's definitely a valuation. If there isn't a valuation, you would just say, I looked at the profits, the share price, time multiplied, I added the goodwill, the profit, I purchased the company worth 3.5 million, I purchased it for 4 million. There's gotta be solid paper trail, right? There's nothing that can just happen. Like, you don't walk into Pick n Pay and say, hi, can I have some chocolate? You're gonna give it to the cashier. The cashier will give you a receipt. The cashier will scan your chocolate. That already is a transaction. That's how accounting works, guys. So like, everything that occurs has paper trail, right? If Pick n Pay wanted to go and track somebody's sale, they actually could. I don't know about their computer systems, because they get so many transactions on a daily basis, right? But I'm just trying to emphasize that everything has to have a paper trail. And the fact that auditors signed off on financial statements that didn't have all the paperwork, yeah. I think in part 2 I'll be discussing about my opinion. Yeah, I think let's close part 1 here. I love you for watching. Please do let me know in the comment section what you think. Bye.